The King's Theatre on a February night in 1843 was the kind of place where the real performance happened, not on the stage, but in the boxes above it. And Isabel Carlyle, Marchioness of Winford, had understood this since the first season her mother brought her here at 17. She sat now in the private box her husband had held for 12 years, alone for the moment, in pale green silk that her maid had pressed for 40 minutes before she would allow it near her shoulders. On the stage below, the tenor was building towards something difficult and beautiful, and Isabel was watching him with the focused attention she gave to all things she wished to appear absorbed in. The curtain at the back of the box was still. The corridor behind it was not quite. She had heard Henry step away during the interval, heard his low voice at the end of the passage, heard the silence that followed, and had not turned. The curtain parted. The seat beside her, Henry's seat, received a different weight. Lady Augusta Ferrers was 24, and beautiful in the way of women who have been told so since childhood and have organized their entire personalities around the confirmation of it. She sat without invitation, arranged her skirts as though the box were her own, and turned to look at Isabel with an expression that was not quite triumphant, not quite nervous, and was, in the end, both. The adjacent box had gone still. On the stage, the first violin held a long, suspended note. Augusta did not lower her voice. "Your husband loves me," she said. The violin held. Isabel did not move. She let the note finish, let it dissolve into the warm, candlelit air of the theater, let the quiet that came after it settle and expand. Then, without turning her head from the stage, she replied in the tone a woman uses when she's reading an account book and finds a column that does not surprise her. "I know," Isabel said. "He loved 3 women before you. Eleanor Marsh in the winter of 38, Lady Caroline Vane in the spring of 40, Mrs. Whitcomb for rather longer than he intended, beginning in 41. She paused a moment, as though consulting a mental ledger. None of them lasted. The adjacent box was entirely silent. Augusta's cheeks had gone the color of the carnations in the lobby below. Isabel did not look at her. She kept her eyes on the stage, where the tenor had resumed, and her hands remained folded, and her expression remained precisely what it had been when Augusta sat down. Attentive, composed, faintly interested in the music. At the curtain behind them, Henry Carlyle, Marquis of Winford, stood with his hand on the velvet and did not move. He had heard everything. What followed was a matter of perhaps 4 minutes, and it was managed by Isabel with a precision that the assembled ton would discuss for the remainder of the season. Augusta rose. She did not speak again. She passed Henry in the corridor without looking at him, and whether she wept in her carriage afterward was a question the morning papers could not answer, because none of their correspondence had been in it. Henry came to his seat. He sat. He looked at the stage. Isabel looked at the stage. When the curtain fell at the end of the act and the house lights rose, Isabel stood, gathered her wrap, and took his arm as naturally as she had taken it every night for 8 years. They walked through the lobby together, and every eye in the room found them and did not leave them. Henry walked with the straightened spine of a man who is fully aware he is being watched and has decided to be equal to it. Isabel walked the way she always walked, as though the room had been arranged for her comfort, and she was mildly pleased with the result. She spoke twice in the lobby, once to Lady Pemberton about a concert the following Thursday, once to the Viscount Ashby about the second reading of a bill Henry had been steering through the Lords. She did not introduce a single topic that was not entirely ordinary. She smiled twice. She laughed once, briefly, at something the Viscount said. In the carriage, she dismissed it. She told the coachman she would walk. Henry looked at her. She did not explain. She descended onto the pavement and walked north, and the night closed around her. London in February at 3 in the morning is a city that belongs to itself, not to the people who live in it. The snow had stopped falling 2 hours earlier and lay now in a thin, exhausted layer on the cobblestones, and the sound it made under her boots was the only sound on the street. Isabel walked at her usual pace for 4 blocks. Then she stopped. She was beside a lamppost on a street she had walked 100 times in daylight. She put one hand on the iron, not for balance, but for something to hold. She stood there for a moment, and then she made one hard sound. Not a weep, not a cry, something lower and more private than either, and pressed her forehead briefly against the cold metal, and stood still. 4 minutes. She counted them, not precisely, but in the way the body counts time when it has decided on a limit. Then she straightened. She removed her hand from the lamppost. She smoothed her gloves. She walked the remaining half-mile home in the same silence she had maintained all evening. And when she reached the house in Mayfair and the night footman opened the door, she thanked him by name and went upstairs. She told no one. Not her maid, who was waiting and who looked at her with a careful professional blankness that said she had heard the carriage come back without its mistress. Not her lady's companion, who was asleep. Not the small leather journal she kept in the table beside her bed and had not written in for 3 years. She sat in the chair by the window until the city began to lighten, and she thought, with great clarity and no particular drama, that she had been ready for this for months without admitting it, and that tomorrow she would need to decide what being ready actually meant. Henry came to the drawing room at 10 o'clock the following morning. Isabel was dressed for travel. This was the first thing he saw when he opened the door, and it stopped him for a moment in the doorway. Her traveling coat, her gloves already on the table beside her, the small case her maid had set by the door. She was standing at the window with a cup of tea she had not drunk, looking out at the square. He had prepared a speech. She recognized this immediately from the way he closed the door with particular care and turned to face her with his shoulders set and his expression arranged into something between contrition and authority. Henry was a gifted speaker in the Lords. He had a voice that made complex arguments sound inevitable, and he had used it on her before, in smaller crises. The time she discovered the letter in his coat pocket 3 years into their marriage. The time Lady Caroline's name appeared in a column she was not meant to see. He had managed those. He had believed, she thought, that he had managed her. "Isabel," he began. "Last night was... Augusta is someone I should not have allowed. It is already over. I want you to understand that. I intend to make it publicly clear within the week that there is nothing." "Henry," she said. She did not turn from the window. He stopped. "I have known about Augusta for 3 weeks," Isabel said. She set the cup down on the windowsill and turned to face him, and her voice was the same voice she had used in the opera box, even almost conversational, carrying no visible heat. "I knew about Eleanor Marsh before her. I knew about Lady Caroline. I knew about Mrs. Whitcomb from a letter I found in the pocket of your gray coat in the autumn of '41, which I returned to the pocket and said nothing about." Henry stood very still. "In my writing desk," Isabel continued, "there is a small locked drawer. You have walked past that desk every morning for 6 years, and you have never asked about it." She let that sit for a moment. "I am not asking you for an explanation, because I have had 6 years to construct every explanation you might offer, and I have already considered them all." "Isabel," he began. "I am going to Wycombe," she said. "My grandmother's house has been sitting empty since the autumn, and the library needs attention, and there is apparently a village school that has been waiting 15 years for someone to take an interest in it. She picked up her gloves from the table. I do not yet know what comes after Wycombe. When I know, I will tell you. You cannot simply... He stopped himself. He looked at her for a long moment, and something crossed his face that was not quite any of the expressions she had expected. Not anger, not the practiced reasonableness he deployed in the Lords, not the particular softness he sometimes produced when he wanted to be believed. It was something quieter and less prepared. How long have you known? He said. About all of it. Since the 3rd year of our marriage, she said. She watched him absorb this. She watched him understand, for the first time, what it meant. Not that she had discovered a thing and been hurt by it, but that she had known a thing and continued, and kept her counsel, and built her life around the knowledge while he had believed he was managing her. She watched him understand that the woman he had been married to for 8 years was not the woman he had thought he was married to. He said nothing. For perhaps the first time in their acquaintance, Henry Carlyle had nothing to say. Isabel put on her gloves. I have written to my grandmother's solicitor at Lincoln's Inn, she said. There is nothing that requires your immediate attention. She picked up her case. I would ask that you not come to Wycombe without notice. I will not be at home to unannounced visits. She walked past him to the door. She did not look back. He stood alone in his own drawing room, in the particular silence of a man who has just discovered that the ground beneath him was not what he had believed it to be, and has no idea how long it has been otherwise. By that afternoon, Isabel's carriage was on the road to Buckinghamshire, carrying her maid, 2 trunks, and a letter already dispatched to Mr. Fellows at Lincoln's Inn. 3 days after Isabel's arrival at Wycombe, the Countess of Ferrers, Augusta's mother, a woman who had navigated 30 seasons of London society with the strategic intelligence of a general and the social instincts of a cormorant, made a visit to Winford House in Mayfair. She arrived at 11, asked for the Marchioness, received the information that the Marchioness was in the country, and spent the following 40 minutes in 3 drawing rooms across Mayfair, letting it be known, with the careful imprecision of someone who has chosen every word, that the marriage of the Marquis of Winford was ending, and that the Marquis would be free by spring. By Friday morning, the story had found its way into the Morning Post, in the oblique and deniable language those columns preferred. Certain arrangements in a notable household in Mayfair, it is understood, are no longer what they were. Henry faced a choice that was not, in fact, a choice. Silence confirmed the story. Denial committed him publicly to a marriage his wife had left. He wrote a letter to the Times. He wrote it quickly, which was his first error, and he revised it twice, which was his second, because each revision added a qualification that undermined the previous sentence. And the result was a document that managed simultaneously to deny the separation, to suggest that Lady Winford was in the country for reasons of health and preference, and to imply, in its very awkwardness, that the writer was not entirely certain of any of these things. The letter was published on Saturday. It was read in the way that London read such things, with the attention given to a document whose meaning lived entirely between its lines. It reached Wycombe on Sunday morning, in the post that arrived with the bread. Isabel read it at the breakfast table. She set it down beside her plate. She poured herself more tea. She did not write a reply, and she did not ask for paper. And she did not, her maid later observed, give any indication that the letter had produced in her anything at all. Wycombe in late winter was nothing like what Isabel had expected, and she had expected nothing in particular. which was itself a kind of freedom she had not felt in years. Her grandmother's house was large in the way of houses built for a previous century's sense of scale. High ceilings, cold corridors, windows that looked out onto formal gardens gone slightly wild at the edges, and a library that ran the full length of the south wing and contained, she discovered on her third day, several hundred volumes she had never seen and had not known existed. She began to read. This surprised her. She had always read, but in London reading had been a thing she did in the margins of a life organized around other people's requirements. And here it was simply what the mornings were for. She read in the library until noon. She walked in the afternoons along the low stone wall that bordered the kitchen garden, and then out across the fields that sloped away toward the village. On the sixth day, she walked as far as the village itself and stood for a moment in front of a small stone building that had been locked for as long as anyone she asked could remember. The woman at the post office told her it had been a school once, endowed by her grandmother's grandmother, and that it had been waiting for a patroness since before the old Duchess died. Isabel looked at the locked door for a long moment. Then she asked for the name of the man who held the key. Henry's first letter arrived in the third week. It was formal, a legal matter requiring her signature, a question about the household accounts, a note that everything was in order. She signed the document and returned it without adding anything. His second letter was less formal. It asked, in a single sentence at the bottom of an otherwise businesslike page, whether she was well. She did not reply. His third, fourth, and fifth letters she read once, and set in the small drawer of the writing desk in her bedroom. His sixth was different in tone from all the others. Shorter, less careful, as though he had written it quickly and sent it before he could revise it into something more manageable. I argued the Leeds petition before the Lords on Thursday, he wrote, and made 3 errors in the second hour that I would not have made if you had read the brief of the night before. I am aware this is not an argument you should find compelling. I am telling you anyway. She read this letter twice. She set it in the drawer with the others. She did not reply to it either. She answered 2 of the 7 letters he sent in those first weeks, and both replies were brief and practical. One addressed a question about the Wycombe property taxes that only she could answer. The other confirmed that she was in good health and had no immediate need of anything from London. In London, Henry managed a parliamentary crisis without her counsel for the first time in 8 years. The Leeds petition was only the beginning. There was a vote on the Poor Law amendments in which he chose the wrong moment to speak and the wrong argument to lead with. And afterward, in the corridor outside the chamber, he stood for a moment with the particular stillness of a man who has just understood something. He should have understood much earlier. He had known, in an abstract way, that Isabel read his briefs and attended his dinners and sat beside him at the tables where the actual decisions were made before they reached the floor. He had not understood, until now, that what he had believed was his own political judgment had been, for 8 years, a collaboration, and that his half of the collaboration alone was not sufficient. He rode to Wycombe on a Tuesday in late February, unannounced despite her instruction, because he had made his decision before he remembered the instruction and could not unmake it in the time it took to saddle the horse. She was in the orchard when he found her, walking along the row of apple trees in a coat that was not quite warm enough for the temperature, her hands in her pockets, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. A late frost had silvered the grass. The kitchen windows of the house were visible through the bare trees, and in one of them, Henry could see the shape of the housekeeper moving about. Isabel stopped when she saw him. She did not come toward him. "I said not to come without notice," she said. "I know," he said. "I came anyway." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression that was not warm and was not cold, and was something more complicated than either. The expression, he thought, of a woman measuring a thing she has not yet decided how to judge. Then she turned and began walking again, along the low stone wall that ran the length of the orchard. And she did not invite him to walk with her, but she did not tell him to leave. He fell into step beside her at a distance of perhaps 3 feet. They walked without speaking for some time. The frost crunched under their boots. At the far end of the wall, she stopped and looked out across the fields, and he stopped beside her. The cold was considerable. He was not wearing a greatcoat. He had ridden fast and not thought about it, and he could feel the temperature in his shoulders and the back of his neck. He took off his coat. He did not put it around her shoulders, because she would have stepped away from that, and he knew it. He set it across the top of the stone wall beside her, where she could see it and reach it, and he stepped back. She looked at the coat. She looked at the fields. Then she took the coat from the wall and held it around her own shoulders without putting her arms into the sleeves, and she kept walking. He walked beside her at the same distance until they reached the gate where the housekeeper could no longer see them through the kitchen window. And there she stopped and told him, without turning, that he should go back to London. He went. The letter came to Wycombe on a Thursday morning in March, and it was not from Henry. It bore the seal of the Duke of Winford, Henry's father, who was 81 and had been dying by degrees for 2 years. And it was addressed in a hand Isabel recognized as the old Duke's own, which meant he had written it himself rather than dictating it, which meant he considered the matter too private for a secretary. "Come on Friday," it said. "Come alone. I have something to tell you that I should have told you 6 years ago, and I am running short of time in which to tell it." She came on Friday. The Duke of Winford received her in his bedroom at Carlisle House, propped against 4 pillows, his face the color of old parchment, and his eyes still entirely sharp. He dismissed the nurse and the footman and the companion who hovered near the door, and when the room was empty, he looked at Isabel for a long moment without speaking. "You know about the pattern," he said at last. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "Did Henry tell you?" "He told me about the first 2, she said. "In our first year, when he was being honest with me. He framed it as history, women he had pursued before we met, who had lost his interest once they returned his feeling. I thought at the time that it was a young man's confusion and that marriage would resolve it." She paused. "I was wrong." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "My father," he said, "pursued 7 women in 30 years of marriage. I watched my mother, Henry's grandmother, accommodate this. She was a woman of extraordinary dignity and no legal recourse and a great deal of private suffering. And she died still married to a man who had spent their entire life together, looking past her at whoever had most recently caught his attention." He stopped and coughed, and when he had finished coughing, he looked at Isabel with an expression that she could only describe as the face of a man paying a debt he had owed for a very long time. "My son was raised by that woman. He watched her. He watched what his grandfather did to her, and he watched her endure it. And he grew up believing, not consciously, but in the way that boys learn the things no one teaches them directly, that this is what men do, and that women survive it. And then," Isabel said, "he became his grandfather." "And then I watched him become his grandfather," the Duke said. "And I said nothing, for 30 years, because I did not know what to say, and because saying it would have required me to examine my own silence during his childhood, and I was not prepared to do that." He looked at his hands on the coverlet. I am telling you this now because I am dying, and I have nothing left to protect, including my own comfort. What is it you want from me? Isabel asked. The old Duke looked up. Not forgiveness, he said. Not your return. I am not asking you to go back to him. That is your decision, and I have no standing to influence it. He paused. I am asking you to give him the chance to be told no by a woman who means it. He has never had that. Every woman he has pursued has either returned his interest or retreated quietly. No one has ever stood in front of him and refused him something he genuinely wanted and made it hold. He was quiet for a moment. I believe I may be wrong. I am an old man who has been wrong about this for 30 years. That it is the one thing he has not encountered. And I think it may be the only thing that could interrupt what I watched my father begin and what I watched my son continue. Isabel sat with this for a long time. The fire in the grate crackled. Outside the windows, London moved in its ordinary afternoon way, entirely indifferent to what was being said in this room. I will think about what you have told me, she said at last. She rose and thanked him, and left the room. The corridor was long, and the carpet was thick, and at the far end of it, Henry was standing with his hands in his pockets and his back against the wall, having been told nothing of what had passed in his father's room, and clearly uncertain whether to ask. She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her. Not warmth, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Or perhaps simply the recognition that the question she had been turning over for 6 weeks had just become more complicated and more important than she had believed. She walked past him to the stairs without speaking. His eyes followed her. She did not look back. Augusta Ferrers, in the weeks that followed, made a series of decisions that were each individually understandable and collectively catastrophic. She appeared at the Pemberton ball in a gown made by Madame Leclerc on Bond Street, who was also Isabel's modiste, and who had, it was noted, produced for Augusta something in a shade of blue that Isabel had worn to 2 significant dinners the previous season. She appeared at the Ashby dinner, and at the Cavendish music hall, and at a breakfast at which Henry was present, and which she had not been invited to until the previous morning. She told Lady Pemberton that she had been received at Winford House on several occasions recently. She told Mrs. Cavendish that she understood the Marchioness was not expected to return to London before summer. 3 of Isabel's closest friends wrote to Wycombe. Lady Pemberton's letter was the longest and the most carefully worded and the most anxious. Mrs. Cavendish's was shorter and more direct. The third, from her oldest friend Charlotte Ashby, was 3 sentences. She is saying she has been received at your house. She is wearing your blue. What would you like us to say? Isabel replied to each of them. Each reply contained 1 sentence. I am at Wycombe. He may say what he likes. I no longer answer for him. The drawing rooms read this sentence with the attention they gave to documents whose meaning was precise. It was not the sentence of a woman who had been displaced. It was the sentence of a woman who had chosen her position and did not consider it inferior to the one she had vacated. The distinction was understood immediately by everyone who received it. And it traveled, as such distinctions do, from drawing room to dining room to corridor within 48 hours. The old Duke died at dawn on the 14th of April. Henry was with him. He had been there through the night, sitting in the small study behind the death chamber with a book he had not read and a fire he had let go low. When the nurse came to the doorway at 5 in the morning, he already knew from her face what she was going to say. He sat for a long time after she left. The fire went cold. The room was very quiet. Isabel arrived at Carlisle House at 7:30. She had received no summons. She had sent herself, having read the notice in the previous evening's paper that the Duke's condition had declined. She came in through the side entrance, spoke briefly to the housekeeper, and went to the small study. And when she opened the door, Henry looked up from his chair with the face of a man who has been alone, with something too large for solitude. She sat in the chair on the other side of the low table. She did not speak. He did not speak. The undertakers would come in an hour, and the solicitors after that. And by noon the house would be full of the organized machinery of aristocratic death. But for now, the room was quiet, and the fire needed wood, and neither of them moved to add any. After a long while, she could not have said how long, his hand found hers on the arm of the sofa between their chairs. He did not take her hand. He simply set his own beside it, and then over it, with the weight of a man who is not asking for anything except not to be entirely alone. She did not withdraw. They sat that way until the sound of carriages in the courtyard below signaled that the hour of private grief was ending. She left before the household woke to its full morning activity. She did not attend the funeral, and this was noted, and the drawing rooms that had been shifting in her direction paused to reconsider. Then Henry, standing at the graveside in the cold April air with the assembled mourners around him, said in a clear and caring voice that his wife was in Buckinghamshire by his fault and not hers, that she had his complete respect and his blessing to remain wherever she chose, and that he did not intend to say more about the matter in public. The stillness that followed this statement was absolute. Augusta's mother, standing 3 rows back, went the color of old chalk. Within the week, she had removed her daughter from London for an extended visit to relatives in Derbyshire, and the question of Augusta Ferrers ceased, in any practical sense, to be a question. Henry rode to Wycombe the following Thursday in the rain. It was a hard rain, the kind that comes sideways in April and finds the gap between a collar and a neck. And he arrived in the entrance hall soaked through, his hat destroyed, his horse handed off to the startled groom, and his expression carrying the particular dignity of a man who has made an impulsive decision and is committed to it regardless of the weather. Isabel came into the entrance hall and stopped when she saw him. The footman was already moving toward the linen cupboard. She crossed to the footman, took the towel from his hands, and went to where Henry stood in the doorway. She pressed the towel against his temple, where the water was running in a small river down the side of his face. Her hand stayed for a moment. Not long. 5 seconds, perhaps. The length of a breath held and released. And then she withdrew it and handed him the towel and told the footman to see to the horse and tell Mrs. Hartley there would be a guest for dinner. She walked back toward the drawing room. At the doorway, she stopped without turning. 3 days, she said. Then you go back. He stayed 3 days. They did not speak in those 3 days the way they had spoken for 8 years, with the careful, practiced fluency of 2 people who have learned to communicate efficiently around a silence neither has named. They spoke instead in the halting, imprecise way of people who are attempting to say things they have not rehearsed. On the first evening, over dinner, Henry said, "My father told me something, before he died, about his own father, about the pattern." He looked at his plate. I think I had known it in some form for a long time. The grandmother who raised me, I watched her. I knew what her life was. I did not connect it to what I was doing until he said it plainly. He told me as well, Isabel said, in March, when he summoned me to Carlisle House. Henry looked up. He summoned you? He wanted me to understand the history, she said. He also wanted to ask me something. She did not say what it was. Henry did not ask, though she could see the question in his face. On the second morning, walking along the stone wall in the orchard, the frost was gone now, and the first thin green was showing on the apple branches, he said, "I am not going to tell you that I will not do it again. I don't know whether that's true, and I have told you enough things I could not support." She walked beside him and said nothing, waiting. "What I know," he said, "is that I have never, in my life, wanted to stop. Not until now. And I don't know yet whether wanting to stop is sufficient, or whether it requires something I have not yet demonstrated I am capable of." He stopped walking. "I think I have loved you more than I have loved anyone. I also think that has not been enough to make me behave as though it were true. I don't know how to reconcile those two things, and I am not going to pretend I do." Isabel stood beside him and looked at the orchard for a long moment. This, she thought, was the first honest thing he had said to her in 8 years. Not the most comfortable thing, not the most elegant, and certainly not the most reassuring, but honest in a way that nothing he had said in the drawing room the morning after the opera had been honest. And nothing in his letters had been honest, and nothing in the managed performances of their London life had been honest. "I will be at Lincoln's Inn on the 17th, she said. "My solicitor will be with me. I want you there at 11 o'clock. He looked at her. "What is it, Lincoln's Inn?" "Come at 11 and you will know," she said, and walked on. On the third morning, she found him in the library before breakfast, standing at the shelves with his back to the door, his hand resting on the spine of a book he was not reading. She had come for something she needed and had not expected to find him there. She stopped in the doorway. "I keep thinking about the locked drawer," he said without turning. 6 years. I walked past that desk every morning." "Yes," she said. "I never asked." His voice was flat with the weight of it. "No." He turned then and looked at her with the expression she had seen at Carlisle House. The one that was not any of his prepared expressions, the one that was simply him, reduced to something that had no performance left in it. "Did you want me to ask?" She was quiet for a moment. "I wanted you not to give me a reason to fill it," she said. He nodded slowly. He turned back to the shelves. She found what she had come for and left the room. And that evening, in the same library with the fire burning low and the last of the April light going out of the windows, he asked her whether she had decided what she would require of him at Lincoln's Inn. "I have," she said. "Will you tell me?" "Tomorrow," she said. "At 11. He stood at the door for a moment before leaving, his hand on the frame. "Have you stopped loving me?" he said. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the fire shifted and a log dropped, and the room changed its shape slightly in the new light. Then she crossed the room. She took his face in both her hands, the gesture of a woman who has made a decision and is not uncertain about it. And she kissed him. Once and slowly, with 12 years of feeling and 6 years of grief, and the full weight of everything she had held in the locked drawer of herself. And then she stepped back. "That is your answer for tonight," she said. "Tomorrow I will give you the rest." Lincoln's Inn at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in May had the particular atmosphere of a place where significant things are decided in quiet rooms by people who have thought carefully about what they want. Isabel arrived with Mr. Fellows, who had been her grandmother's solicitor and was now hers, and who had spent the previous 6 weeks preparing the document she now carried in a leather case. Henry arrived 3 minutes before the hour, alone, in the clothes he wore when he wanted to be taken seriously rather than liked. He sat across the table from her. Mr. Fellows sat at the end. The clerk sat at the small desk beside the window. Isabel opened the case and set the document on the table between them. "This is a deed of separate maintenance," she said. She did not preface it or explain it in terms that softened it. "It gives me permanent independent residence at Wycombe, with sole control of my fortune, which, as you know, was settled on me by my grandmother's marriage settlement and has always been mine in law. It also contains a clause that is not standard." She waited while he found the clause. "That clause requires your signed acknowledgement, to be deposited with both families' solicitors, that I have separated from you by my own choice, and that any future reconciliation must be initiated by me, not by you. You are not to come to Wycombe uninvited. You are not to apply pressure through mutual friends, through letters that become more frequent, through public gestures designed to be reported to me. If you wish to return to this marriage, you may ask, once at a time of my choosing, and I will answer you. If I do not write, you do not come." Henry read the document. He read it the way he read legislation, carefully, without expression, noting every word. He read it twice. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a cart moved over the cobblestones of the lane below, and the sound of it came up through the window and faded. He looked up from the document. "How long?" he said. "1 year," Isabel said. "From the date of this document. In that year, I am asking you to do one thing, not for me, not to demonstrate anything to me, because I will not be watching, and you are not to report to me. For yourself. Refuse what you want. When the pattern begins again, and it may begin again, because it has begun again 4 times in 8 years. Refuse it, not once, consistently. Discover whether you are capable of it." She paused. "At the end of the year, if you believe you have demonstrated to yourself that you are capable of interrupting this pattern, you may come to Wycombe and ask me. I will not promise you an answer. I will not promise you a particular answer. I will promise only that I will give you one." Henry looked at the document again. He had come to this room expecting, she could see, some version of a negotiation. Money, conditions, public statements, promises. He had prepared for those. He had not prepared for this. Not a demand for what he owed her, but a demand that he discover what he was capable of. "If I sign this," he said slowly, "and the year passes, and I come to Wycombe, you may still refuse me." "Yes," she said. "And the clause, the acknowledgement that the separation is your choice, if that becomes public, it will not become public unless you make it so," she said. "It is deposited with solicitors, not published in the Morning Post, but yes, if it surfaces, it will confirm that your wife left you by her own decision, and that any return is entirely conditional on her invitation. That is accurate. I am not asking you to sign something that is untrue." He looked at her across the table. She met his eyes and held them, and she did not soften what was in her face, because what was in her face was the truth, and he had been given managed versions of it for long enough. Henry picked up the pen. He read the clause about reconciliation one more time. He signed his name at the bottom of the page, and the witnesses signed after him, and Mr. Fellows blotted the ink, and the document was folded and sealed and placed in the leather case. Isabel rose. She put on her gloves. She picked up the case. At the door of the chamber she stopped, and she did not turn, because she did not need to, and because some things are said more clearly to the air in front of you than to the face of the person you are speaking to. "I have loved you for 12 years, she said. "I loved you before you deserved it, and I have loved you through things that should have ended it. And I am still, despite everything. a woman who loves her husband. A pause. Do not waste the year I am giving you. She walked out into the corridor, and the door closed behind her. And Henry sat alone at the table in the quiet room with the signed document and the ink still drying on the page. The year that followed was not a single dramatic act, but a discipline. Which is harder? Henry refused a political appointment in June that would have required him to vote against a bill he believed in exchange for the support of men whose support he had always coveted. He refused it by letter, in 2 sentences, and did not explain himself further. He refused a second appointment in October for different reasons, with the same brevity. In September, a woman at a house party in Hertfordshire, young, clever, and fully aware of what she was doing, made it clear over the course of 2 evenings that she was available to be pursued. Henry recognized the feeling that rose in him as clearly as he would have recognized a familiar road. And he left the house party the following morning, giving as his reason a matter in the Lords that required his return to London. There was no such matter. He went back to London and spent the evening writing a letter to his father's grave. Not literally, but in the way that men sometimes write things they mean to leave somewhere other than their own minds. He burned the letter in the fireplace of his study and went to bed. In December, the same feeling arose, a different occasion. He left the dinner early. He wrote nothing this time. He simply went home. He wrote to Isabel every week. Short letters, factual, carrying no pleas and no pressure. What was happening in the Lords, what the weather had been, a book he had read, a conversation he had found interesting. He did not ask her to reply. She did not reply. He wrote anyway, because he had decided to, and because the discipline of writing without expectation of response was itself a form of the practice she had asked of him. He visited his father's grave in November, in the rain, and stood there for a long time without speaking, and then walked back to the carriage. He learned slowly that refusing what he wanted was not a decision made once. It was a decision made again every time the wanting arose, which was not infrequent and which did not become easier with repetition so much as it became more familiar. A known weight, a recognized slope, a path he had learned to step away from before he was too far down it to step back. In the autumn of the following year, when 14 months had passed since Lincoln's Inn, a letter arrived at Winford House in Mayfair. It was in Isabel's hand, and it contained 3 lines. The orchard is in fruit. Come if you wish. I make no promise. He came. The drive to Wycombe in the October afternoon was the same drive he had made before, in rain and in frost and in the flat gray of a February morning. But this time, the light was amber, and the trees along the road were the colors of things ending and beginning at once. And he made it without hurrying, because hurrying was the wrong approach to something you had waited 14 months for. She was in the library when he arrived. The housekeeper let him in and brought tea, and he sat in the chair by the fire, and Isabel sat across from him. And they spoke the way 2 people speak when they have been corresponding for over a year and have finally found themselves in the same room again. They spoke about the village school, which had opened in the spring and had 22 pupils. They spoke about the Leeds petition, which had finally passed. They spoke about a book she had been reading and a speech he had given in the Lords in the summer that she had heard about from Charlotte Ashby. They spoke about his father and about the orchard, and about the particular quality of October light in Buckinghamshire, which was different from October light in London and better. The fire burned lower. The room darkened at its edges and grew warm at its center. She closed the book that had been sitting open on her knee, and he looked at her across the low table, and she looked back at him, and neither of them spoke for a moment. He did not make a speech. He did not produce an argument. He said, "I came because you asked me to. I am asking now because I want to. And because I believe, I am not certain, but I believe that I have done what you asked me to do. Not perfectly, but honestly." She looked at him for a long time. The fire shifted. Outside, the orchard was dark, and the first stars were beginning. "I know," she said. "I have read your letters." She reached across the table and set her hand over his. And this time, it was she who found him, and she who stayed. He extinguished the lamp when the fire had burned to embers, and the darkness of the library was warm and complete, and what happened in it was between them and no one else. The next morning, light came through the east windows of Wycombe in the particular gold of an October dawn. And on the breakfast tray that Mrs. Hartley brought to the upstairs sitting room, there were 2 cups. On the writing desk in the adjoining room, the small locked drawer stood open and empty, its contents gone, burned in the library grate the night before in the last of the fire's light. No one had witnessed the burning except the man who had finally, after 12 years and 6 years of silence, and 14 months of a discipline that had cost him more than anything he had ever done, become someone who deserved to see it. He had not asked what was in the drawer. He had watched it burn. That, she had decided, was enough.